From A&E, this is Biography.
Jimmy Hoffa. He was a grade school dropout who revolutionized union organizing and almost single-handedly transformed the Teamsters into an awesome national power. Throughout his storied career, Jimmy Hoffa accumulated wealth, influence, and a legion of loyal supporters willing to follow him to the grave. But he also made some powerful enemies determined to put him there.
For what we do, our actions speak for themselves. Thank you.
He literally came from nowhere and created a dynasty. He was a charismatic man, a powerful man, a tell it like it was in your face type guy.
The union came first, his family came second. He didn't have any distractions, any outside interest.
He had this tremendous energy. He didn't drink, he didn't smoke, he didn't chase girls. All he wanted to do was work.
I have more fun here working than anybody can have on a golf course or any sport you can name.
He was a devoted father as well as much appreciated husband. On the other hand, he was egotistical. I think he was power hungry. There's no question the guy was a criminal.
Hoffa did a tremendous disservice to truckers across America. Let's face it, he was corrupt.
My ethics, very simple. Live and let live, and those who try to destroy you, make it your business to see that they don't and that they have problems.
Hey, thanks for coming. We can't do it without you guys. Thanks.
James P. Hoffa was elected president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters in December 1998.
Permanent trade status. Let's go to the Hill and let's give hell. Come on, let's go. Let's go. Let's go.
He vowed to restore the Union to the glory days it enjoyed under his father, Jimmy. The union that Jimmy Hoffa built was once the biggest and most powerful in America. It was also the most corrupt. The power of the Teamsters, as well as their near self-destruction, are the crux of Jimmy Hoffa's deeply divided legacy. James Riddle Hoffa was born on Valentine's Day, 1913, in the poor mining town of Brazil, Indiana, 60 miles west of Indianapolis. He was the third of 4 children born to a Pennsylvania Dutch coal miner and an Irish immigrant mother.
He had a loving father and respected his father a lot, and so he had quite a secure home life. They were in the lower class. They didn't have much, so they learned early in life that they had to work and work hard.
When Jimmy was 7 years old, his father, John, died of black lung from working in the mines. The boy was old enough to understand that his father had been literally worked to death. Jimmy's mother, Viola, resolved to keep the family going. She managed to get by doing laundry for other families in town. Jimmy and his older brother, Billy, inherited their mother's determination and her hard edge. They shined shoes and delivered the clothes their mother washed.
Dad told me a story one time about some little ruffians that came and roughed the boys up and caused the laundry to be dumped out of the basket and get dirty, so the mother would have to do it all over again. And they took care of these boys in proper order.
He was always self-conscious about how he looked. He was short. His size gave him a complex, and I think he had to fight a little harder and show more muscle.
Viola Hoffa packed up her family in 1924 and moved from Indiana to Detroit, where there were more job opportunities. She started working in a laundry and at an auto parts factory polishing radiator caps. Young Jimmy had a hard time adjusting to city life, and the kids in the neighborhood called him a hillbilly.
It took him a while in Michigan to let the kids understand that he wasn't going to put up with a lot of their teasing, that they They called him names and so forth.
The Hoffa family struggled, even with Viola's 2 jobs, so 12-year-old Jimmy got a weekend job bagging potatoes at a grocery store. He quickly worked his way up to delivery boy. 2 years later, Jimmy dropped out of the 9th grade to work full-time.
The family needed money, and they didn't need him in school, so he had to sacrifice his education, and he had to go to work. He got a job where he could, make some small amount of money.
Not long after the stock market crashed in the fall of 1929, 16-year-old Hoffa got a job unloading produce for the Kroger Grocery Company. The men were only paid for the time they spent unloading goods. The rest of the day, they waited for the next delivery.
All the workers were in a kind of a depressed group. They didn't have no money, they were all broke, and they really didn't have nothing.
They had no protection on the job and very, very low wages. And so they decided to organize themselves into a local union.
With the country falling into the grip of the Great Depression, most of the men were cautious. But not Hoffa. He had seen how hard his father worked only to die young, with no benefits or security for his family. Hoffa called for a work stoppage one night in May 1931, just as the men were unloading trucks filled with fresh strawberries.
We unloaded half the car and got it wide open, so it lost all its refrigeration, and then refused to unload the rest of it. Everybody got excited.
The men, inspired by Hoffa, decided they would not unload these strawberries unless management signed a union contract with them.
Kroger management agreed to meet with Hoffa the following morning, as long as the workers resumed their duties. After several days of negotiating, Jimmy and his aides won a contract for the workers, their first ever. Hoffa was thrilled. He had found his calling.
Even at that early age, he obviously was a very charismatic person. He was 17, 18 years old. He's out there saying, this is what we're going to do. We're going to have this strike.
Union leaders were impressed with the young man. So 1 year later, 19-year-old Hoffa landed a job as a full-time organizer for Teamsters Joint Council 43 in Detroit. Jimmy immediately took to the rough and tumble world of union politics, despite the dangers. Companies often hired mobsters to intimidate workers and disrupt picket lines with brute force. Hoffa found a solution. He forged his own relationship with the underworld.
He came to the realization that he needed muscle. And so he made a deal with the mafia. And so, actually what he wanted them to do really was to just stay out of those strikes and just sit on the sidelines and not fight them.
He forged alliances with mobsters in Cleveland, Chicago, New York, northern New Jersey, and in other places, feeling that that was just recognizing reality.
At age 22, Jimmy was appointed business agent of Teamsters Local 299 in Detroit. It was a run-down, debt-ridden unit with only 250 members. Union officials hoped that the energetic Hoffa could breathe new life into the group. Young Jimmy relished the challenge.
In negotiations, he had a saying. He said to me, Bob, he said, when we go into negotiations, don't get up and leave. Let the bastards get tired, and then we can whip them.
A group of female laundry workers approached Hoffa in March 1936 and asked him for advice in organizing a strike. Jimmy could not help noticing one of the women, a 17-year-old Polish beauty named Josephine Poziewak. He would later write of that moment, "I felt like I'd been hit on the chest with a blackjack." The couple had a brief courtship and were married that fall by a justice of the peace. Not everyone was happy about the marriage, especially Jimmy's mother.
She was a rather stern person. My memories of her, she was a little scary. She did not approve of the marriage of my mother and my father, and I would think probably that my mother's family didn't approve either. They thought of him as a hillbilly, and the other side thought of her as a Polak.
Their family's disapproval only served to make the couple closer, and it lasted.
My parents were kind of opposites. My dad neither drank nor smoked in his whole life. My mother loved a good time. She liked a cocktail. She loved to have parties. He wasn't real fond of parties. He called her the sergeant because she was the only one that could boss him around. And she would tell him when he'd come home, well, this is what needs to be done, and would, tell him different chores that needed to be done, and he would always do them very cheerfully.
But young Hoffa was happiest on the job, fighting battles for the Union and rising through its ranks. At the age of 24, he was elected president of Local 299. Under his strong hands-on leadership, membership soared from 250 to 4,000. Most were truckers and warehouse workers. To them, Jimmy was just one of the guys.
The name is Hoffa. Hi, I'm Jimmy. I know you. Stuff like that. He'd call some of them by name. Made tremendous impression.
Even though he was president of the local, Hoffa would never ask his men to do something he wouldn't do himself. The hot-tempered Jimmy worked the picket lines and was always willing to take on anyone who stood in his way.
My mother always told the story about when he would come home all full of blood, and she would clean the blood up, put a clean shirt on him, patch him up, and say, you shouldn't go back, and then off he would go back. And then come back again with the other side of his head open.
When he wasn't fighting for the Union, Jimmy was dedicated to his young wife. He took pride in the purchase of their first house in Detroit. In 1938, Josephine gave birth to a girl, Barbara. 3 years later came a son, who they called Little Jim.
It was a special time when he was home because he wasn't the 9-to-5 dad. As busy as he would try and find time for us to take us fishing or hunting or to be with us in a special way.
He was a father whom they both adored and often said there was like walking down the street with some god, because he was so often mobbed in Detroit by well-wishers, and they were enormously proud of that.
The Hoffas bought a hunting lodge near the Iron River in northern Michigan in 1939. Jimmy would often take his Union cohorts up to the lodge to relax. It gave him an opportunity both to work and be with his family.
When we would go up deer hunting, we'd bring our boys with us. They'd take off with Hoffa, and he'd trip them through the woods and teach them what he knew about nature.
He was not a college professor, didn't profess to be educated beyond what he was. But the amazing thing is that he was so intelligent.
Over time, Hoffa would use that intelligence not only to drive hard bargains for the truck drivers who made up the bulk of the Teamsters, he would also craft a deal with the devil. Using his long-standing mafia connections, he would rise to the very top of the Union. Those connections would haunt him for the rest of his life.
I don't intend to have the impression left that's been stated publicly that I'm controlled by gangsters. I am not controlled by them.
During World War II, while Americans were fighting overseas, young Jimmy Hoffa was traveling across the country, fighting his way to the top of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. Hoffa was 28 years old when the war began, but was not called to serve because his union work with the trucking industry was considered essential to the war effort. Throughout the 1940s and early 50s, the mine worker's son was driven by memories of his own family's poverty.
My dad had memories of the Depression, and we grew up with that legacy, so that as we prospered and as things got better, he never let us forget. And sometimes he would say to us at a particularly wonderful moment when we were all so happy and we had everything we wanted, he would say, I wonder what the poor people are doing. And that was a way of telling us, be sure you appreciate what you've got.
But Hoffa's steady rise to power had a dark side. He had never broken his early ties to the mafia. The mob controlled Union locals around the country and used that power to push their man Hoffa to the top. Jimmy was elected Union Vice President in 1952. As part of his new responsibilities, he controlled the Teamsters Central States Pension Fund based in Chicago. With millions of dollars at his fingertips, Hoffa found a way to pay back his friends in the mob.
His deal with the mob was that they would help him stay in power if he would let them use the pension funds as a bank and make investments as they wanted to. Hoffa was a smart guy. He knew what he was doing, and they knew what they were doing.
Many of the pension fund loans went to mob frontmen for the construction of hotels and casinos in Las Vegas.
Jimmy had the foresight to see that those were good loans and how Vegas was going to grow. And he was, in my judgment, largely responsible for Vegas being what it is today. But let's not lose sight of the fact that those loans were made to mobsters, and that was muscle that he could use. There was invariably a kickback in the form of cash or a hidden interest.
Then Hoffa ran smack into someone who was just as tough and tireless as he was, but who came from the other side of the tracks, Robert F. Kennedy. These two men could fight a class war all by themselves.
Both men, the Ivy League aristocrat, Bobby Kennedy, and Jimmy Hoffa, really did have a lot in common. Both were feisty, both have been described as ruthless, both generated enormous loyalty and enormous hatreds. And I think there really was a chemical reaction between the two of them.
At the time, Bobby Kennedy was chief counsel for a U.S. Senate committee investigating union corruption. Hoffa first appeared before the committee in August 1957.
Did you say that SOB, I'll break his back?
Figure of his speech, I don't even know who I was talking about, and I don't know what you're talking about.
Bobby Kennedy and his brother Senator John Kennedy, who served on the committee, charged that the Teamsters were controlled by the mob. The tension between Chief Counsel Kennedy and Teamster boss Hoffa was apparent from the start.
I don't intend to have the impression left, as been stated publicly, that I'm controlled by gangsters. I am not controlled by them.
I say you're not tough enough to get rid of these people, then.
Well, I don't propose to
You haven't moved
tough.
against any of them.
I don't propose to act tough, and I will follow the Constitution of the International Union.
Hoffa was convinced that Bobby Kennedy wanted to destroy him because he couldn't control him.
He had very little respect for Bobby, and that was a tremendous clash of personalities, and most people rolled over for the Kennedys, and my father wouldn't.
In my opinion, he is never in his life ran up against a situation he couldn't dominate, that he couldn't control, and have his way. He's just a spoiled young millionaire.